All right. Once again, thank you all for being here this morning to the Medical Marijuana and Legal Cannabis Forum. I am J.P. Johnson, Director of Communications for One Mavis Thompson in the License Collector's Office. We appreciate you all being here for this very important topic. Obviously, medical marijuana has not just been the craze of the country, but in Missouri, certainly things have picked up, which is why we have two important speakers here this morning for the first part of this pending CLE course. One, John Payne, campaign manager for New Approach Missouri, responsible for Amendment 2 being on the ballot and passing in the state of Missouri. As I stated earlier, December 6th, it became a constitutional amendment making it legal here in the state of Missouri. And Mr. Paul Bailey, who is from the Department of Agriculture. And as I stated earlier, the Farm Bill, which passed in 2018 federally, made hemp legal nationally, and the state of Missouri followed up and passed a similar policy to ensure that we are able to reap the benefits of that policy here in our state in a very robust agricultural market. So I will step out the way, introduce my boss, Mavis Thompson, who will then introduce our two esteemed guests. And once again, thank you all for being here.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. We first want to start off by thanking our co-sponsor, Lewis Rice, for co-sponsoring this. And the reason why I think that we had a law firm co-sponsor is this is the first time that we've done a continuing legal education course. Now, I've heard from the state of Missouri, Missouri Bar Association, that they are backlogged on approving credits for CLEs, and so the CLE is pending today. Once it is approved, we will notify the attorneys and they can fill out their forms that are already in the packet and get credit for this CLE. And so without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started.
Go ahead. Good morning, everyone. So as John said, I'm John Payne. I was the campaign manager for New Approach Missouri, which was the primary proponent of Amendment 2 here in Missouri. I was involved in the drafting of the amendment and have been involved in cannabis policy in the state of Missouri professionally since, I guess, late 2011. So I've watched this issue evolve quite a lot. And what I'm going to do is, first I'm just going to kind of give you an overview of where things stand in the process currently and where this will be headed over the next year or so. And then hopefully we'll have some time for questions after both of us have had a chance to speak. I generally prefer to have more Q&A than just speaking. So right now we're actually nearing the end of the rulemaking process here. So when Amendment 2 passed, it basically created a structure for medical marijuana in Missouri, but it did not answer every single question about how this will work. It left a lot of that up to the Department of Health and Senior Services. And I believe you're going to be hearing from Director Fraker from the department here a little bit later today. But a lot of it said, here's the things that are guaranteed as rights under the amendment. Here are things that the department can do. Here are things that the department can't do. And it also gave them firm timelines for when certain things had to be implemented. And one of the first of those timelines is that by June 4th, they had to have the rules created for the system, and they had to have application forms for patients and for people who are seeking to get into the industry to either cultivate, make medical marijuana infused products, or dispense medical marijuana. All those application forms have to be made available by June 4th. Which is next Tuesday now. So it's coming up very fast. And the department has actually said that they have now finalized the rules, although they still do have until next Tuesday if they would like to change them at all. And so those, all of that will become publicly available in its final form next week. And then 30 days after that, which is July 4th, so technically it won't happen then because the office won't be open. But on July 5th, they will start accepting applications for patient identification cards. And so the way that will work is there's a physician certification form and patients will go to a doctor, and the doctor will examine them and say, yes, you either have a qualifying condition as defined by Amendment 2, which entitles you to a patient ID card, or if you don't, then you are not entitled. But the qualifying conditions that can entitle you to a patient ID card are very broad and really left up to the discretion of the physician here in the state of Missouri. And so they include things like cancer, epilepsy, HIV, AIDS, chronic pain, but there are also some kind of catch-all provisions in there such that one of them says that any condition which in the professional judgment of a physician could benefit from the medical use of marijuana, they are allowed to write the certification for. And so then the doctor sends that certification to the Department of Health and Senior Services, and then the patient submits a application along with that certification. The state has 30 days to process it, and then that patient is in the program. And so that's the first time that can actually happen will be on July 5th. And then on August 3rd, what will happen is the forms to apply to cultivate, to dispense, to make medical marijuana infused products, those application forms will be made available. And then that will, the state will begin accepting those applications, excuse me. And there will be a 2-week window in which they will accept those application forms, so from August 3rd to August 17th. And then once that window closes, the state will have until the end of the year, till December 31st, to evaluate all the applications that they take in. And at the end of that, they will have to award a minimum of 60 cultivation licenses, 86 medical marijuana infused products licenses, and 192 dispensary licenses. And that's divided up by congressional district. So 24 for every each of the 8 congressional districts in the state. To put that in some context, basically St. Louis City and St. Louis County comprise almost entirely 2 congressional districts. Congressional District 1, which is mostly the city and some of the interior suburbs and most of North County, and then Congressional District 2, which is mostly South and West St. Louis County. It does also take in a little bit of St. Charles and Jefferson County, but those 2 congressional districts combined will have 48 dispensaries. So basically St. Louis City and St. Louis County, a little under 48 dispensaries total. And so the state will have to award those by the end of the year, and there are set criteria in the amendment that say here's the methods by which the department has to evaluate all of these applications, and they have also drafted application questions that pertain to all those criteria in the amendment that are going to form the application itself. And so the first actual licenses will be in people's hands by early 2020, and then we expect that we'll actually start to see people be able to make purchases of medical marijuana sometime next spring, because there will have to be time for people to actually build out these facilities, and to also they have to have a inspection by the state before they can begin actually operating. And so it'll probably be a little under a year from now when we actually see the first sales. And we expect that there's probably going to be about 2 to 3% of the population of the state enrolled in the medical marijuana program after a couple of years of it being operational. And there's a lot of variance in the estimates of the number of people that participate, and there's been a couple of different studies that have come out arguing different points of view on this. But if you look at the states that have similar qualifying conditions to what we have now in Missouri, they generally end up somewhere between 2 and 3% of the population participating in the program. And so for a state of Missouri, 6 million people, that would mean between 120 and 180,000 people would be medical marijuana patients. And actually, if you look at a state that just passed medical marijuana a little bit ahead of us, Oklahoma, they actually had their election on this in June of last year, so a little under a year ago, and they have actually already crossed the 3% threshold in their medical marijuana program, which is really fast growth that I don't think we've ever seen in any other state. And so, if that's in any way similar to what we see here in Missouri, that could even mean that we have 3% is not even the ceiling there. But I think a safe estimate would be between 2 and 3%. And so that means that there's probably going to be somewhere around neighborhood of $600 million in revenues in this program at the height of it. So this is going to be a fairly rapidly expanding market, and we'll see what happens in the future. But within a couple of years, it will be probably $600–700 million in revenues every year in the system. So that's kind of a preview of where this is all going, and I'll be happy to answer questions here after the next panelist speaks. So thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. My name is Paul Bailey, as you see there on the screen. JP got a good picture of me from Facebook. And he asked for a picture. I could have sent him a great Hollywood photo shot of myself, but he found that one. That's doable. But hey, you're probably wondering, why is the Department of Agriculture here? Well, JP asked me to come speak to you about industrial hemp. What's industrial hemp, you say? Well, industrial hemp is cannabis. It was considered by federal government and state government for a long time to be a controlled substance, just like marijuana, until just recently. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a background and tell you a little bit about what the Department of Agriculture is expecting and what we will be doing here in the near future. So just roughly begin with, in 2014, just so you know that the state of Missouri had its really first medical marijuana bill passed in 2014, law. It was called the Hemp Extract Law. It was sponsored by our now Attorney General, Eric Schmidt, in the Senate. And it was, thank you, Mavis, I'm sorry. Hope everybody can hear me. It passed the General Assembly and went to Governor Nixon, and he signed it into law. The Department of Agriculture was asked to license 2 nonprofit organizations to give them the ability to cultivate industrial hemp for the purposes of manufacturing hemp extract. The hemp to be cultivated technically wasn't called industrial hemp at the time. It just simply referred to as hemp in the bill, in the law. But it is industrial hemp in that it contains has to contain less than 0.3% of delta-9 THC. Okay? From that production, that cultivation, they can manufacture hemp extract. And the whole purpose here was to allow the manufacture of hemp extract for it to be used by patients who had registered with the Department of Health and Senior Services and obtained a hemp extract registration card for the treatment of epilepsy. Okay? So it's really the first medical marijuana law in the state of Missouri. That was in 2014 it passed. Rules were promulgated. Licenses, I believe, were issued to the first 2 nonprofit, or the only 2 nonprofits, sometime in early 2016, January, February 2016. And both of those licensed nonprofits are located here in the St. Louis area, cultivating hemp indoors and manufacturing the CBD. The law requires those 2 licensees to sell their hemp extract, a lot of people call it CBD oil, to sell their hemp extract from their cannabidiol care centers, which are at the same facility in which they are growing or cultivating the hemp. And it's the only place that they can sell their product. And again, they can only sell it to people who have this card issued by the Department of Health. So that's our first involvement with hemp in the state of Missouri, going back probably World War I, 70 years ago, 80 years ago. So that was 2014. Also in 2014, the United States Farm Bill was passed and signed. This Farm Bill in 2014 authorized, allowed states, upon passage of appropriate state law, to create a pilot research program on industrial hemp. A lot of states have since done so, In the beginning, there was just 2 or 3 states, Kentucky and Colorado were namely the first two in 2014 to pass a state law recognizing the ability for that state to authorize or create in their Department of Agriculture a pilot program, and they did that. Since then, there have been several other states. Missouri finally passed a state law. House Bill 2034 was passed by the General Assembly in 2018. It was signed into law, signed by Governor Greitens on June 1st of 2018. Went into effect August 28th. And we have been working, the Department of Agriculture has been working to implement this pilot program ever since. Now, there's been a lot of changes, a lot of things have occurred since Governor Greitens signed that bill June 1. Namely, the department promulgated rules, and those rules were filed originally, I believe, November 21st with the Secretary of State. Went through a 30-day open comment period, which closed around February 1. Have been since revised and refiled with J-Card and the Secretary of State, and should be finalized at the end of July. Okay? At that time, we have put together a timeline, how we're going to implement this program. I brought with me today our manager, our program administrator for the Hemp program, Mr. Alan Freeman. He's sitting back here in the back. Alan, raise your hand, let people see you. Mr. Freeman is going to be running this program for us at the Department of Ag. The timeline now is going to have to probably be adjusted. Original timeline, we had late July through August outreach and education around the state on the rules and the statute regarding industrial hemp and our application process. We were going to have an open application period beginning in September of this fall. Issue industrial hemp licenses for cultivation probably 1st of October, middle of October. Like I said, that's probably going to change. Now, a little bit about the pilot program before I move on to the next piece of legislation. The pilot program, the House Bill 2034 that became law, it was a research-oriented law. And it limited the number of acres of industrial hemp to be grown in Missouri to 2,000 acres. Further, it limited the number of acres that a producer could grow. A minimum of 10 acres had to be grown. No more than 40 could be grown by one producer. So in essence, we were going to either be licensing 200 producers or we were going to license 50. So that is all going to change. And why? Because House Bill 824, this legislative session, 2019, passed the General Assembly. Prior to it passing the General Assembly, it was folded in the Senate into an omnibus bill, Senate Bill 133. And it also passed the General Assembly. But this bill, this legislative session, basically does away with the pilot research program. It creates a commercialized industrial hemp program. So before we ever have one seed planted in the ground of industrial hemp, we will be moving straight to commercialization. And won't have had any research done because legislation moves so fast. So where we're at today is we're waiting. The General Assembly passed both of those bills. And I understand that the omnibus bill, Senate Bill 133, has gone to the governor's office. So we're just waiting for the governor's office to do their bill review and waiting for the decision made by the governor to sign that bill. Once he signs the bill will go into effect August 28th. On August 28th, the department will have the authority to promulgate rules, basically file rules with the Secretary of State. So basically what we're going to end up having to do is take those existing rules that we've written and have already filed, which will be in effect by the time this new legislation goes into effect, revise those rules. We'll have to revise those. The commercialization, this new bill, there are no limits. No limits. We don't have a clue as how many acres of industrial hemp are going to be planted or how many growers are going to want to grow it. It took out the 2,000 acre statewide limit, as well as the individual minimum and the maximum acreages as well. But industrial hemp is going to be grown in the state of Missouri. It's going to be planted by seed or propagal in the field or indoors. There will be indoor cultivation. No residential cultivation. None. So it'll be a commercial type building, warehouse type building that's the infrastructure has been retrofitted for the purposes of cultivation, natural lighting, whatever. But the industrial hemp program will be kicking off this fall. We don't have a new timeline. We're still waiting, and we're gonna have to wait. And I imagine it'll probably be a couple of weeks before the governor signs the bill, but we can't really move until he does. Once he signs the bill, then we'll know whether or not we'll be able to put together a timeline. But I'm going to guess that he's going to sign the bill. I think that there's support for this statewide, so I believe he'll sign it. And I believe that we will still probably be very close to our original timeline that we have for the pilot program and the issuance of licenses to those who want to grow industrial hemp, sometime probably in October, maybe first in November. We got a lot of work ahead of us and a lot of work that Alan's going to be doing, but we have a need for a budget. Last year in 2018, when they did pass the pilot program, there was no appropriation or FTEs given to the Department of Agriculture to run this program. So in the meanwhile, we had to put in a new decision item request in 2019 in the budget request. That's been done. So it is in the budget. So we'll be waiting for the governor to sign that budget, but we should have that appropriation come July 1 and a couple of FTEs that will be able to get this program off the ground, get it running. But that's basically the history of industrial hemp in Missouri. And like John said, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer any questions if that's okay with JP. Thank you very much.
It's perfectly okay with me. And so, because this is recording and folks might not be able to hear whatever the questions, John, you've done this a couple times. Do you want to MC sort of the back and forth here?
Good morning. I have a question, and I'm not understanding the difference in the plant itself. What's hemp? What's marijuana? How do you make medical marijuana? I'm not sure, and I thought that I remembered that there was different parts of the plant. Could you explain that a little better, please?
Sure, I think we'll both have something to say on this one, but so the question is what differentiates marijuana from industrial hemp because they're essentially the same plant. Do you want to start out with that, or do you want me to?
Sure, I can try it, John. As John said, basically it's the same plant. You have a chemical makeup within the plant, which is the distinguishing factor, basically. As I mentioned, the industrial hemp will have a low THC value. The medical marijuana will have a higher THC value. The plant contains multiple, and I'm not an expert on the plant. It contains multiple different types of cannabinoids as well. And I believe that is the main chemical that the folks are looking for the medical purposes. Am I right, John? Yeah. Right. So, but the plant itself, there's not much difference. I mean, to us who are not experts, have lots of knowledge, and I assume every one of you here are that way. Basically, you'll notice that there is a difference between the male plant and the female plant. Now, the leaves on both plants are fairly identical in appearance. as well as the bud on the plant. But the female plant is more of a, I best describe it as a small Christmas tree. It grows and it looks like a small Christmas tree, kind of like a spruce tree in shape and size, really bushy, lots of leaves. The male plant is long, it's tall, doesn't have as many leaves on it, and it's basically grown for the fiber. John, do you have anything else to add to that? I mean, that's my understanding of it, so John might have a little more knowledge, so I'll let him explain.
So, essentially, yeah, they are the same plant. It's mostly in the difference is in how they are grown. The industrial hemp plant, as he was saying, is they're grown for the stalks and for the seeds. And so you want to have a really tall plant that produces a lot of the stalks are very fibrous, and so that's usually what people are going for with industrial hemp. And you can also use the seeds for food, and you can make oils and stuff out of the seeds. Now with medical marijuana, though, you are growing it for the buds, generally speaking. And so that means that you are, you're going to, and you want to find the buds that have particular strains or particular profiles of cannabinoids, THC, CBD, and terpenes in there. And so it's a very different way of growing it. You're going to select for different sorts of genetics when you're growing it, but they are all cannabis. So they are the same plant at root. More questions?
Can I grow some plants at home?
So under the medical marijuana program, you can, if you are a patient, and have apply for a patient cultivation card. As long as you have a physician certification that's valid, and you can get a patient cultivation card. It is a $100 fee, but that's really the only barrier there is that. Now, on the industrial hemp thing, that's purely commercial, correct?
Yes, I mentioned it a while ago in my presentation. There'll be no residential growing industrial hemp. There are a few states out there in their pilot programs, Tennessee being one, that did license individuals to grow industrial hemp in their home. And that became a nightmare for Tennessee, and they moved to amend legislation and rule to change that because the fact that they were having to send their state employees into the basements of some people's homes to inspect 3 industrial hemp plants. Now, why would somebody want to grow 3 industrial hemp plants? Okay. So it become more of a law enforcement type issue for them, and our good legislators in the state Senate and the House did their research, learned that it's occurring in those other states, and they put it in this bill in 824, House Bill 824, that there be no residential growing of industrial hemp.
Right here.
Sure, it doesn't have to be grown on a farm. It can be grown indoors in a commercial building, such as a warehouse. And in most cases, there will be a lot of production of industrial hemp indoors for the purposes of manufacturing CBD oil. They'll use mainly female plants, very similar to the medical marijuana, so that they're producing many more flowers and buds on the plant, because that's what they want to harvest, to squeeze to make the CBD oil. That they'll do indoors, like the 2 licensees that we have today that are making the same, not the same, but almost the identical same material for the treatment of epilepsy. They're going indoors, so that will benefit the community.
And with regards to medical marijuana, most of that, there is an allowance for outdoor cultivation of medical marijuana, but generally speaking, that does take place indoors. So that's going to be, I think you're going to see more of that in urban and suburban areas than probably you might think, given that it is a crop, but it's mostly an indoor cultivation.
My question is pretty much the same. I'm from LA, so we have stores around Los Angeles. So I'm a business owner here. So when you say commercial, are you saying you have to have so much land as commercial, or as a business, commercial business, you can also distribute it and grow it on your land if you have it?
Well, my use of the word commercial just means that anybody and everybody's going to have a chance to grow it. Okay? So if you want to cultivate industrial hemp, you can apply for a license. If you meet all the licensing requirements, you'll be given a license and can cultivate industrial hemp. You'll have a decision to make whether you cultivate it on land and soil or if you do it indoors.
To the mic, please. Hey, Paul, you were mentioning about the program. So licenses will be available next year for hemp, but you had talked about the lack of research. Isn't there a pilot program for research, or the schools will be doing something with that this year, or am I mistaken?
The House Bill 824 and the Senate Bill 133 both contain, they're identical bills, identical language. They both contain an exception or an exemption for state universities which own research centers, which have research centers, allowing those state universities to do research this summer. Okay? And there was emergency language written in separately that the governor has to sign. If he signs that emergency language, then the day he signs it or the day following, any university, any institution of higher ed in the state of Missouri that has a research center will be able to put seed in the ground or grow it in a greenhouse this year to do research prior to there being full-blown commercial production or cultivation in 2020.
For medical marijuana, is there a certain amount or a certain plant that you can use in your residence?
Could you repeat the last part of that, sorry?
Is there a certain amount or a certain plant that you must use in your household for residential?
So there is, if you're a patient cultivator, you can grow up to 6 plants, and there is a limit on the amount that if you produce more than a certain amount, then you're supposed to destroy. I think you can have up to a 90-day supply of medical marijuana if you're a patient cultivator, and I believe a 30-day supply is defined as 4 ounces. So I believe that you can have up to 12 ounces at a time. I believe that's correct. I will say that they've updated the rules since I last read them. I didn't get a chance to read them over the weekend. The last update was on Friday, but I believe that is correct. And I know the 6 plants is correct because that's defined in the amendment. But there's no restriction on the type of strain that you can grow. You can grow whatever strain you prefer.
And John, just to clarify, what's the timeline for patients? You gave like when licenses would be given out for dispensaries and stuff, but when do individuals get their cards?
So yeah, in July. So the forms will become available on June 4th, and then 30 days later, so theoretically July 4th, but the department won't be open then. July 5th, they will start taking the applications for patient identification cards and start issuing those. So that's when that can start happening.
Hi, you had talked about the education centers. Does that also include like the Danforth Center? And what is the reason for them to be doing this research?
Ma'am, I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question.
You had talked about that the universities will be doing some research to be able to start growing it. And then I was wondering if that included like the Danforth Center, the one, like on the, on the Shaw Garden or whatever. And then what's the purpose of the research?
Very good question. The purpose of the research, let me first go back to the language. The language says that it's for institutions of higher ed. So therefore, I don't believe the Danforth Center or any other research institution would qualify. So it has to be a university of higher education with a research center. And as the language reads, it's my interpretation that the research must be performed on the grounds of the research center, which is owned by the university, and by the employees of the university. This language exempts them from the requirements of having to obtain a registration, a license from the Department of Ag to, one, possess the viable hemp seed and for the cultivation of the hemp. So I don't believe that the language of that bill will allow the university to contract with a cooperator to allow that cooperator to grow industrial hemp on his land and allow the university personnel to come out and do their research on that land. It has to be grown on the research center property owned by that university. So don't believe those institutions such as the Danforth Center will be able to. And the purpose that the sponsors of the bill, Representative Francis, he wanted the universities to do research on hemp this summer for the main reason of trying to identify the best varieties of industrial hemp to be grown in Missouri. We have research centers all across the state that are university owned and operated, and it is known by other states that industrial hemp can be planted, one variety of industrial hemp, say, could be planted in the most further extreme southeast Missouri down in the Boot Hill and grow and produce a plant that contains less than 0.3% delta-9 THC, but that same variety be grown in northwest Missouri in different soil type, different climate, will actually produce a delta-9 THC that exceeds the 0.3%. And that's what they want the university to do so that they can educate the growers, the producers, around the regions of the state to inform them of the best types of varieties to use. I think I heard you. The research. Oh, for the camp. Okay.
So the universities, would they take away the licenses from individuals that want to be growers, and because there's only a certain amount of licenses available under each category, or were they separate?
Right. Very good question. To answer that, I will answer it two ways. Under the pilot program, no. The pilot research bill, House Bill 2034, limited universities just to 20 acres of that 2,000 acres statewide. So if you had 20 universities in the state that wanted to grow, they'd only get 1 acre each. Okay? Now, under the new commercial bill, House Bill 824 and Senate Bill 133, those limits on the acreages, as I stated earlier, are gone. They have been removed. So there is no limitation on the number of acres statewide and no limitation on individuals. We have 6.5 million residents in Missouri. We can license 6.5 million people to grow industrial hemp. The legislation, the language written in for the university research, as I mentioned earlier, it's an exemption from the statute. It exempts them from the requirements of the statute. The research, the universities that they do, they are not required by the statute to obtain a registration issued by the Department of Ag, a license, to cultivate hemp and research. So, no, to answer your question, no, it won't affect.
Yeah, 19 people.
Okay, so does that mean industrial places like the Danforth Center and all that, they'd have to just go through the same licensing practices or application process just as anybody else? And if they do they have a leg up on the just average individual?
I didn't catch last.
Do they have kind of a leg up on securing a license as compared to the average individual?
No, no, they won't have a leg up. They'll have to go through the same process as if John wanted to grow industrial hemp commercially in the state. He submits an application for a registration as a producer. The Danforth Center would do the exact same thing. Just because they're a research center doesn't give them any more of a, hey, we're going to give you a license and not somebody else. Everybody has to meet the same requirements. Mm-hmm.
So if you have a university that has a medical school that wants to do research and they don't have property to grow the plant, they can't contract with someone else to grow it for medical research?
That's my interpretation, yes ma'am.
And that is in the actual language of the bill?
It doesn't say that. What it says in the bill, if you'll read the bill, it says that the institutions of higher education and universities with research centers will be allowed to cultivate industrial hemp for research purposes. And the intent, because we have talked to the legislator, Representative Rick Francis, who wrote that language, it is his intent that that research be conducted only on grounds of the research center by the university personnel. That is his intent of that language.
And is there any restrictions on what the research can be for? I know you mentioned testing strains. So
no,
that
I don't think there'd be any
beyond.
limitations or restrictions. No.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Just to make sure I have a better understanding, so industrial versus medical hemp being grown, I think earlier John said like there's going to be 60 cultivators, but now there's unlimited amount?
So, yeah, well, there's two different laws here.
Okay.
So with the industrial hemp, there is no limitation on the number of licenses that they'll grant. And actually, there's no limitation in the amendment on the number of licenses for medical marijuana either. There's a minimum that the state has to issue, but the department has the power to cap that. They have to issue the minimum, but they don't have to issue any more. It's at their discretion, essentially, at that point. But it will be, there will be a limit on the number of licenses for medical marijuana in Missouri, for the foreseeable future, I imagine. Mainly because it's the concern is that medical marijuana could be diverted to other states or sold to non-patients, and that's what tends to happen if there's a lot of overproduction. And so that's the reason for the having some limit on the number of producers.
Okay, so 60 was the minimum?
Yeah,
Okay.
But I think it's at least in the rules that the department has promulgated, they're saying we are going to issue the minimum at the beginning.
Gotcha. Okay.
What would be the restrictions? What type of license I would have to open up a store to sell the hemp oil? And how would I find a distributor?
To sell CBD oil?
Yes.
The Department of Agriculture will not be regulating that, and that is not a regulatory function of this bill. Under the pilot program, which will be going away once the governor signs the commercial bill, the commercialization of hemp, the Agriculture Department will be responsible regulating the cultivation of hemp from the planting of the seed or the propagule to the harvest. And once that plant is harvested, it's then considered non-viable, with the exception of the seed, and the seed will be considered viable unless it's denatured, made into grain that goes into your granola bars, okay? So once it's considered non-viable and cannot survive living, all right, or growing, then it is a regular commodity. And there is no requirement of anybody having a license to handle, process, or sell that commodity.
Okay, but a store, I would have to have a license. Would I have to get a license from the collector's office or from the state?
I think Mavis better answer that question because I don't work for Mavis and I don't know what Mavis's requirements are.
Yes, we've actually jumped ahead to the next panel regarding licensing, but the short answer is yes, and wait for the next panel.
Any more questions? One more.
I was just wondering, how are you planning to protect like the strains that are going to come out of Missouri? You know, the people that are going to start growing it, they're going to develop specific strains. And the other question that I had was, you know, you mentioned that the difference between like basically marijuana and hemp. Could you foresee a future where a lot of the marijuana can be genetically modified so it doesn't basically make like the psychoactive parts of the marijuana, and then you can use it for, you know, like all of the terpenes, and would you guys allow that in the legislation?
Yeah, so you know, to take the first question, you know, how are people going to protect the strains? There's no real provision in Missouri law that would have anything other than, you know, if people keep it proprietary, like a trade secret, to protect their strains. Now, you know, when this becomes federally legal, it opens up a lot of questions about, can a strain be patented? And you know, I know enough to know that I don't know the answer to that in intellectual property law, but it is a topic of a lot of debate. I'm inclined to say the answer should be no, but again, I'm not specialist enough to really give it a definitive answer there. And then your second question, I'm sorry, was on I forgot there.
I was just asking about like because the way I see it is, if you grow hemp, it's a lot safer. I mean, I would agree.
Yeah, basically, if they could breed out the psychoactive portions of it. I mean, the answer is there are strains already that have those properties that are very, very low THC and essentially have no psychoactive properties, and people use them for, you know, different things like combating anxiety or pain. But different patients have different needs, and so it's. Some of those strains are very effective for some people, and some people find them ineffective. And so, you know, it's really the individual patient needs a different cannabinoid profile in their medicine. So there's no, I don't think there's, I absolutely support, you know, different people producing those different strains, and the law allows for that, but I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer for the patients.
All right. I want to thank Mr. Paul Bailey. I want to thank John Payne for this first panel, for coming all this way and speaking about this very important topic. Thank you, gentlemen. And we'll take a 10-minute break. We'll start back here at 9:10 sharp. Please have some refreshments and stretch, and see you back here in 10. Next panel. Right here we have one Mavis Thompson, Esquire. She is the license collector for the city of St. Louis, recently elected to her second term. We also have former Representative Lyndall Fracker, who is now the director of the new medical marijuana program here in the state of Missouri. I'd like for everyone to give them a warm welcome and to introduce Mavis to the stage to begin our second panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I think we started off with a question regarding if you need a license in the city of St. Louis to operate the business of either growing, cultivating, transporting, etc. And like I said, the answer is yes. I will start off with City Code 8.06.150. I'll repeat that for the attorneys as well. City Code 8.06.150. Now, this code actually gives the license collector for the city of St. Louis the authority to identify an operation as a business after investigating and confirming the criteria for doing business that has been established. long story short is that once you set up something that you're going to be making money from, and you make money from that, you have to be licensed as a business in the city of St. Louis. And so the specific language of the code actually says, every person conducting any business, industry, or enterprise for which no license is specified in this chapter or in any other section of this code or ordinances of the city shall procure a license therefore from the city and shall pay the same license fee as for the nearest related business industry available. And so, right now we don't have a medical marijuana business license. And so the next closest license to that is called a graduated business license, which is a GBL, graduated business license. And that license is actually based on the number of employees that you have working in your business. And so the licenses go as such: 0 to 2 employees, $200 a year annually. Our license cycle actually goes from May to June. And so 0 to 2 employees, right at $200. 3 to 5 employees, $325 a year. 6 to 10, $675, and it goes up incrementally. And we have that information, and I can provide it to you. And so right now we're looking at these individual industries, particularly extractors, growers, testing and inspectors, edible chefs, dispensary managers, receptionists or cashiers, couriers, and cultivators and harvesters. Those are the types of businesses that we're looking to come out of this whole medical marijuana industry. And just recently, the Board of Aldermen, it introduced a bill. Alderman Jack Coulter, he introduced Board Bill number 2. And the purpose of Board Bill number 2 is, the chapter is to regulate the location, establishment, and operation of all medical marijuana facilities in order to ensure the health, safety, and general welfare for the residents of the city of St. Louis. And like I said, that bill has just been introduced, and so we'll see, but we believe that it will go very quickly through the Board of Aldermen. And so yes, you do need a license for the examples of the businesses that we've already stated, and for any others that the license collector by law deems is in the process of a business. And so that's basically my presentation, because all of this is so new. Like you said, it's all evolving. So we're waiting on the final passage of Board Bill number 2 in the Board of Aldermen, but I don't have to wait exactly for the passage of the bill, because I already have the authority to license you closest to the business that we see, which would just be a general business license. Any questions about licensing?
So for folks wanting to get into the industry, if they want to be licensed as a dispensary and a cultivator, will that be possible?
Yes, that would be possible, and it depends on if you're having both locations at the same place, whether you would require a license to cultivate as well as a license, any other license that's associated.
Okay, so is there a maximum on the number of different ways you can get into the industry? Can one person be at every level?
And you know what, I'm not sure.
Yes, one entity or person could apply for up to 5 dispensary licenses, 3 cultivation licenses, and 3 manufacturing licenses. So 11 total licenses would be the maximum that an individual or an entity could apply for. And those can be located in the same facility, campus, building, but they would require separate licenses.
Thank you.
Any other questions regarding the licensing process?
Yeah, you talked about the different, I guess, positions of employment within a business that would license, that would apply for a license. Would a business that had a security personnel, would that be considered an employee of that business?
Well, there is a definition regarding a full-time equivalent, and so it would also depend on if that person was a full-time equivalent at your facility. Part-time would not count as a FTE, a full-time equivalent employee.
So every full-time employee has to apply for a license to work at?
No, ma'am. Your license is based on how many full-time equivalent employees that you have working at your facility.
Okay.
So you're the employer, you have 3 employees, then you would fall under the category of 3 to 5 employees.
Okay.
And again, remember, I am talking about the license to do business, to operate a business in the city of St. Louis. And so what Lyndall was talking about, he's talking about state licenses that you have to have. So there are a couple of things. You gotta be licensed in the state. It's just like any other professional. If you are a barber beauty shop, you have your professional license on the state, but to operate that shop in the city limits of the city of St. Louis, you have to have a license to do that.